What if I told you that everything you believed about the romance of outdoor living is not true? Imagine a world where temperatures drop so low that trees explode with a deafening crack as the sap inside their trunks freezes. This is not a camping trip with thermal underwear and hot tea in a thermos, but an endless battle against an invisible and merciless enemy. The cold here is not just a weather phenomenon, but a living creature that seeks out every crack in your clothing to steal your last bit of warmth. In winter, the Great Plains turned into a white, icy hell where any mistake could cost you your life. You've probably seen beautiful pictures of snow-covered wigwams, but the reality was much harsher and more prosaic. There were no stores to buy food and no walls that could completely protect you from the piercing wind. People found themselves face to face with nature, which did not forgive weakness or carelessness during the winter months. Every action, from finding water to simply sleeping, required tremendous effort and knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Local tribes developed unique survival techniques that may seem impossible or even frightening to modern humans. They learned to use the scarce resources of the winter steppe in the same way that we use electricity and gas. Their homes were masterpieces of engineering, and their clothing was a perfect system of thermoregulation. But even with this knowledge, winter remained a time of great hardship for every member of the tribe. It was a war of attrition where the enemies were frost, hunger, and the dark, oppressive psychology of confined spaces. In this video, we will take a detailed look at what people of that era faced and why a modern city dweller would break down there within the first few hours. We will look inside their dwellings, learn about their diet, and understand how they kept their sanity in complete isolation. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how one inconspicuous detail in the design of the dwelling saved entire families from certain death in 40-degree frost. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of a simple tent? Europeans who first saw the dwellings of the plains peoples considered them primitive huts, completely unsuitable for the harsh winter. They were deeply mistaken because behind the external simplicity lay a highly complex aerodynamic design. A teepee is not just a cone made of animal skins, but a perfectly tuned machine for retaining heat and removing smoke. The cone shape allowed winds of any strength to flow around the dwelling without knocking it over or blowing out the heat. The main secret that made survival possible was the inner lining, called ozon or rosa. This sheet of leather stretched inside the dwelling at human height created the effect of a double wall. Cold air entering from below did not enter the living area, but escaped upward between the outer covering and the inner wall. This air pocket functioned like modern insulation in the walls of our homes. It was thanks to this physical principle that the interior remained above freezing even in the bitter cold. Building a dwelling in winter required special skills and knowledge of the landscape. As the ground froze solid, it was impossible to simply drive stakes into the ground, so they were often tied to heavy stones or frozen into the ice. The entrance was always oriented strictly to the east, facing the rising sun and with its back to the prevailing westerly winds. This minimized heat loss each time the door was open. Even the position of the smoke vent was adjusted every minute with special poles depending on the direction of the wind. Inside the dwelling, the space was organized with mathematical precision for maximum efficiency. The hearth was not located exactly in the center, but slightly offset toward the door so that the smoke would escape better into the valve. Sleeping places were located along the walls, within the range of heat radiation from the fire and heated stones. The earthen floor was covered with a thick layer of sage branches or grass, and covered with skins on top. This multi-layered bedding insulated people from the icy cold coming from the ground. But even with all these tricks, the temperature inside was far from what we would consider room temperature. The floor could be around 0, and the heat was at head level, so you had to move around crouching down. Water in vessels standing against the wall furthest from the fire often froze overnight. Living in such a house required constant monitoring of the fire and the condition of the tires. Any hole or poorly closed valve could lead to the instant cooling of the room. The snow around the dwelling was not completely removed, but was used as additional external insulation. It was sprinkled over the lower edge of the tire, creating a sealed cushion that protected against drafts. Over time, the snow settled and turned into an icy foundation that further strengthened the structure. This was an example of how the elements themselves were used to protect against them. Unlike the log cabins of the colonists, the leather walls of the teepees let in sunlight during the day. This created a surprisingly warm, golden glow inside, which helped combat winter depression. The walls breathed, preventing the accumulation of moisture, which was the main enemy in cold conditions. The logs in European houses became damp and rotten, while the leather covering remained dry. Other types of shelters were used by the peoples of the subarctic and northern forests, but the principle of multi-layering remained the same everywhere. They built temporary shelters out of branches and snow, using its porous structure to retain heat. The snow needle, quins, worked on the principle of a thermos, retaining the heat of the human body inside. The temperature in such a snow shelter could remain around zero, even if it was -40 outside. The slightest mistake in the construction or orientation of the dwelling could cost the entire family their lives. If the smoke valve was set incorrectly, the room would instantly fill with acrid smoke, causing suffocation. If the stakes were poorly secured, a storm wind could tear off the cover, leaving people defenseless. It was survival engineering, where death itself was the examiner. It would be very interesting to hear your opinion on such construction methods. What do you think about the reliability of such structures compared to modern tents? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about what people actually use to heat their homes? We are used to thinking that forests and steppes are full of firewood, but on the Great Plains, trees grew only in narrow strips along rivers. In winter, when everything was covered with snow, obtaining wood became a titanic task requiring enormous energy expenditure. In addition, wet or frozen wood produced little heat and a lot of smoke, which was unacceptable in a confined space. Therefore, the main fuel was what modern people would consider disgusting garbage. These were sun-dried bison dung patties, which were harvested on an industrial scale. They burned slowly and evenly, gave off excellent heat, and surprisingly produced almost no smoke. The smell when burning was reminiscent of smoldering grass and was quite tolerable. Without these supplies, it would have been physically impossible to survive in the treeless steppe. Collecting fuel was a daily and exhausting chore on which the life of the camp depended. Women went out in search of it, digging through the snow and looking for the coveted pieces of fuel under the snowdrifts. Each piece was worth its weight in gold, and its consumption was strictly controlled by the elders. Fires were never lit for beauty or to create atmosphere, only for cooking and heating. In the forest regions where the Iroquois lived, the problem was different. There was plenty of firewood, but it had to be chopped and dragged. In winter, the frozen wood became as hard as stone, and stone or bone axes often broke. Fallen trees were often hidden under meters of snow, and it was not easy to reach them. People collected dry fallen wood and broke off the lower dry branches of fir trees, which burned like gunpowder. The fire inside the dwelling required constant, round-the-clock supervision by a special person. If the flames burned too brightly, dry skins or support poles could catch fire. If the fire went out, the temperature dropped catastrophically quickly, threatening the sleeping people with frostbite. The ability to maintain a small fire was a vital skill that was learned from childhood. Carbon monoxide, an invisible and odorless killer, posed a particular danger. In a tightly closed winter dwelling, poor ventilation could lead to tragedy in a matter of hours. Therefore, even in the strongest blizzards, small openings had to be left for fresh air to enter. The balance between keeping warm and being able to breathe was delicate and dangerous. To start a fire, they used specially prepared nests of dry grass and moss, which were stored in the driest places. Losing or getting the tinder wet meant being left without fire, which was effectively a death sentence. Sparks were struck with flint, and this process was a real torture in the cold with frozen hands. Every fire lit was a small victory for man over the icy desert. Ashes from fires were never thrown away. They were used in everyday life and hygiene. Hot stones from the hearth were used to heat sleeping places, wrapping them in skins. These were a kind of ancient hot water bottles that kept people from freezing on cold nights. Heat was conserved, accumulated, and distributed with incredible care. The lack of fuel forced people to huddle together, warming each other with their body heat. This changed the very concept of personal space, making it non-existent during the winter. Loneliness in winter was not just sad, it was technically impossible for survival. Did you know that clothing was no less complex a system than heating? You will learn about this in the next chapter. Want to know a secret that will change your life and your idea of comfort? Modern membrane fabrics and synthetic insulation are considered the pinnacle of technology, but indigenous peoples have created something just as effective. Their clothing was not simply sewn skins, but a complex, multi-layered system with air chambers. The main principle was not to warm, but to preserve the body's own heat, creating a thermos effect around the person. The basis of the winter wardrobe was skillfully tanned leather, which acted as a wind barrier. It was impregnated with smoke and fat, which made it virtually waterproof, yet breathable. Unlike modern synthetics, leather did not accumulate condensation, which would turn into an icy crust in the cold. This property of the material was critically important, as moisture kills faster than cold in winter. But the main secret that allowed people to stay in the snow for hours was their footwear, moccasins. They were sewn with extra room so that a thick layer of dry grass or wool could be placed inside. This insulation created dead air around the foot, which prevented the cold from reaching the skin. If the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with new grass, which was a brilliantly simple solution. Clothing was never tight-fitting so as not to interfere with blood circulation, which is the body's main source of heat. Wide sleeves and loose shirts allowed the arms to be tucked inside, warming them against the body. Belts were used to regulate ventilation, tighten them to retain heat, loosen them to release excess steam while working. Overheating and sweating were just as dangerous as direct cold. Hoods or separate collars made of thick fur were used to protect the head and neck. Wolverine or wolf fur was especially prized because it did not freeze from breath. This property of the fur prevented the formation of an icy mask on the face, which could cause frostbite. Every detail of the costume was thought out through centuries of trial and error. Particular attention was paid to protecting the wrists and ankles, where blood vessels are close to the skin. Special fur cuffs were used there to act as seals. Women's dresses in winter were complemented by separate leggings that covered the legs to the knees. This allowed for mobility without sacrificing thermal insulation. It took months of painstaking work to make one set of such clothing. The leather had to be cleaned, softened, smoked, and sewn with tendon threads that did not rot from moisture. Losing a mitten or moccasin on a winter hike was equivalent to losing a limb. Therefore, spare shoes were always carried in a warm place, such as a pocket. In the longhouses of the Iroquois, the clothing was slightly different, but the principle of layering remained the same. The use of plant fibers in combination with fur gave excellent results in the humid climate of the forests. People knew how to combine materials in such a way as to compensate for the shortcomings of each. Surprisingly, with such clothing, it was possible to sleep directly on the snow if the location was chosen wisely. It created a microclimate that allowed a person to survive in conditions that are beyond the capabilities of modern equipment. It was a second skin, reliable and functional. If you like learning about such forgotten technologies, don't forget to like this video. What if I showed you a time machine in the world of food? Imagine a product that can be stored for years without refrigeration, does not spoil, and provides tremendous energy. Pemmican was just such a superfood, a real strategic reserve for survival in winter. It was not just food, but concentrated energy that allowed the body to generate heat from within. The basis of pemmican was bison or deer meat, dried to a rock-hard consistency and ground into powder. Melted internal fat was added to this powder in a 1-to-1 ratio. Fat is the most caloric fuel that exists in nature, and in winter it was vital. Sometimes dried berries were added to the mixture for flavor and vitamins, but this was not necessary. One handful of pemmican contained as many calories as several kilograms of fresh meat. This allowed hunters and travelers to carry several weeks' worth of food in a small bag. The body did not need to expend energy digesting heavy fibers and excess water. It was quickly absorbed, providing an instant burst of energy and internal warmth. In winter, when hunting was unstable and often unsuccessful, Pemmican became the only source of life. It could be eaten dry on the go, which was important when it was impossible to light a fire, or it could be thrown into boiling water to make a thick and hearty soup in a couple of minutes. The versatility of this product amazes even modern nutritionists. The preparation of pemmican was a mass event in which the entire tribe participated after a successful hunt. It was hard physical labor, but people understood that their lives in winter depended on it. The bags made of rawhide, in which the finished mixture was packed, were sealed with fat for airtightness. Such canned food could lie in hiding places for decades, remaining edible. The lack of fresh vegetables and fruits in winter was compensated for by the consumption of all parts of the animal. Fat, bone marrow, internal organs. Everything was eaten, providing the necessary balance of micronutrients. Scurvy, the scourge of European sailors and polar explorers, was virtually unknown among the indigenous peoples of the plains. Their diet could be called the ideal keto diet, adapted to extreme cold. Hunger was a constant companion in winter, and the ability to endure it was an important skill to learn. People ate once a day, conserving supplies if the hunt was unsuccessful. Pemmican was strictly rationed, and no one dared to take more than their share. Discipline in eating was as important as discipline in battle. Even in the hungriest times, sharing food was considered a sacred duty. If one family ran out of supplies, others were obliged to help, even to their own detriment. It was a strategy of collective survival, where the death of one weakened everyone. Individualism was impossible in winter. European traders quickly appreciated pemmican and bought it by the ton for their expeditions. Without this Native American invention, the exploration of the northern continent would have been impossible. It was the ideal field ration, unmatched until the advent of modern freeze-dried foods. But how to move through deep snow to obtain the resources to create this miracle product? In the next chapter, you will learn about mobility technologies. In winter, the ground disappeared, giving way to an endless sea of loose, deep snow. Normal walking became impossible. People sank waist-deep, expending their last ounce of strength with every step. Without special equipment, any trip outside the camp became a deadly trap from which there was no escape. The snow hampered movement, making hunters slow and helpless. The answer to this challenge was the invention of snowshoes, an ingenious device for distributing weight. They consisted of a wooden frame interwoven with strips of rawhide in a complex pattern. The support area increased many times over, allowing a person to literally glide over the surface of snowdrifts. This gave an incredible tactical advantage over animals that got stuck in deep snow. The shape of snowshoes varied depending on the region and type of snow. On open plains, long and narrow models were used for fast movement in a straight line. In the dense forests where the Iroquois and Cree lived, wide and short, bare paws were preferred for maneuverability. The construction was light but surprisingly durable, capable of supporting the weight of a person with a load. Toboggans, lightweight sleds made of curved boards, were used to transport cargo. They did not sink into the snow but glided over it, following the tracks left by a person. A toboggan could be used to transport the carcass of a hunted animal or firewood, which was impossible to do on foot. This greatly increased the range of hunters and gatherers. Moving on, snowshoes required special technique and trained muscles. An unaccustomed person quickly became tired, rubbed their feet, and suffered from snowshoe disease, inflammation of the tendons. Indians, however, could run dozens of kilometers a day on them without slowing down. It was freedom of movement where nature posed a barrier. Snowshoes were made from ash or birch wood, which was steamed and bent into the desired shape. The mesh had to be dense enough to support weight but not trap snow. If wet snow stuck to the snowshoes, they became as heavy as shackles. Caring for the equipment was a daily ritual, drying, repairing, and lubricating with grease. Even horses, which appeared on the plains later, were useless in deep snow. They got stuck, broke their legs, and could not get food from under the snow. Therefore, in winter, people again relied only on their feet and the technologies of their ancestors. Snowshoes restored man's status as master of the winter forest. Orientation in the snow-covered steppe, where there are no landmarks, was another important skill. People read the direction of the wind from the ridges in the snow and determined the cardinal points by the trees. Getting lost in winter meant freezing to death, so observation was paramount. The white silence was an insidious labyrinth without walls. Sometimes, to wait out a blizzard, snowshoes were used as a frame for a temporary shelter. They were stuck into the snow and covered with skins or blankets. The versatility of this tool made it an indispensable companion for any trip outside the camp. It was the key to the winter world. Without snowshoes, winter hunting, exploration, and communication between tribes would have been impossible. This invention ranks alongside the wheel in its importance to the peoples of the North. Are you ready for the shocking truth about communal living in the past? Imagine a world where personal space was non-existent as a concept, and the very idea of privacy was considered a rare luxury. While people could live in separate dwellings on the endless plains, things were different in the forest regions. In the Northeast, the Iroquois spent the winter in longhouses built for large families and entire clans. These houses stretched for tens of meters and could accommodate up to 20 related groups. They were simultaneously a dwelling, a fortress, and a symbol of communal life. If people lived in separate huts on the plains, then the longhouse was their complete opposite. This huge room had no windows, and light only entered through the doors at the ends. In summer, the house was relatively tolerable, but in winter, it turned into a closed world. People lived side by side, sharing every square meter of space. Day and night, the room was bustling with life. Silence was impossible in principle. Imagine a room half the length of a football field filled with families. There were no partitions, rooms, or secluded corners. The entire space was divided between clans, and each section was used as efficiently as possible. Fireplaces, bunks, food supplies. Everything was visible to everyone else. In winter, this house became a huge living organism. People were constantly surrounded by other people. In winter, this space turned into a real beehive. People moved together, ate together, worked together, and slept almost side by side. Personal space existed only as a conditional agreement. Everyone understood that such crowding was the price of survival. In a harsh climate, loneliness meant death. That is why the Iroquois learned to live in harmony. In the center of the house, a row of fires burned, stretching almost from one end to the other. This fire was not only a source of heat, but also the heart of the house. The idea was that the smoke would escape through holes in the roof. But in winter, when snow covered the roof, the draft deteriorated. The smoke turned into a thick veil, filling the entire space. It accompanied people constantly. When the smoke could not escape, it lingered inside like fog. Eyes watered and throats burned from constantly inhaling the acrid air. People coughed and suffered from respiratory diseases, but they had no other choice. The damp smoke permeated clothing, hair, and walls. It became part of everyday life. The Iroquois even used the expression to eat smoke, which meant to live in a house. However, it was the cramped conditions that were essential for survival. 100 human bodies created a constant source of heat. Even when the fire died down, the temperature inside remained above freezing. People covered themselves with skins and slept on bunk beds along the walls. They kept each other warm with their bodies. It would have been impossible to heat such a building on their own. People slept on large platforms arranged in 2 or 3 tiers. It was warmer on the upper levels, so the elderly and children often climbed up there. The lower bunks remained cold, but even there, people survived thanks to rough skins. Each clan had its own place by the wall. There were no separate bedrooms. Everything was open space. Food supplies hung from the ceiling beams and took up a significant part of the room. Dried corn, beans, nuts, and pumpkin were stored in bags and baskets. This food was the result of a whole year's labor, but it also attracted rodents, which had to be constantly chased away. Life was noisy. Conversations, children's cries, laughter, and the sound of instruments created a continuous background noise. The house was never quiet. Silence was a luxury that could only be enjoyed outside. But in winter, it was dangerous to go outside. The wind cut through the skin, and snow quickly covered the paths. Therefore, most of life took place indoors. People learned to hear each other through the noise and not to notice what could not be changed. Their hearing adapted to the constant hum. Social tension in such conditions could become a huge threat. Any quarrel could escalate into a conflict that would disrupt the life of the entire community. To avoid this, there were strict rules of conduct. The elders and matriarchs of the clans kept order. Their word was law. They prevented conflicts before they even began. The ability to get along with neighbors was as vital as the ability to hunt or build a house. People were raised in an atmosphere of respect for shared space. Everyone understood that the community was their protection. Therefore, any violation of the rules was perceived as a threat to all. Mutual respect was not an idea but the norm. Ventilation in a longhouse was provided by doors and smoke vents in the roof. Controlling this air was a real art. If you opened it too wide, the house cooled down. If you closed it, people suffocated. Drafts blew near the floor, so life took place on raised bunks. The floor was covered with skins and mats to make it less icy. In winter, the longhouse turned into a workshop, school and social center. Men repaired tools, women sewed clothes or wove baskets, and children learned crafts. The elders told legends that had been passed down for centuries. The house became a living encyclopedia of traditions, and all these activities took place in one common space. In such conditions, infections spread very quickly. Colds, coughs, or stomach illnesses were instantly transmitted to everyone. It was impossible to isolate the sick. There simply wasn't enough space. People relied on their natural endurance and immunity, but sometimes diseases wiped out entire families. It was a constant danger. Nevertheless, the community supported each of its members. No one was left alone with hunger, illness, or fear. Shared responsibility bound people together more strongly than any walls. This made the community resilient, even in the harshest winters. Strength lay in unity, and that was their main protection. But how did people cope with the psychological pressure of endless winter rather than the physical pressure? We will discuss this in the next chapter. Winter in the north is not only cold, but also endless, oppressive darkness. Short daylight hours were followed by long nights that could last up to 16 hours. For the human psyche, this ordeal was sometimes worse than hunger. Winter blues, or what we now call seasonal depression, was a real threat to the mental health of the tribe. To keep from going mad from inactivity and gloom, people invented a powerful tool: storytelling. Winter was a time for stories, legends, and myths that were forbidden to tell in summer. It was not just entertainment, it was a complex system of education and psychological relief. The storyteller transported listeners to other worlds, making them forget about the cold and cramped conditions. Stories structured time, which lost its contours in the darkness. They reminded people who they were, where they came from, and why they had to survive. Elders passed on the experience of generations, encrypted in metaphors about animals and spirits. This maintained the cultural code and unity of the group during a period of isolation. The monotony of everyday life was broken by complex games of dice or hidden object. The excitement made the blood rush faster, evoked emotions, arguments, and laughter. Games were an outlet for releasing accumulated tension and aggression. You could lose everything, even your clothes, but it added spice to life. Art played a crucial role. The most intricate embroidery with beads and porcupine quills was created in winter. Fine motor skills and concentration on the pattern put the craftswomen into a meditative state. This helped them disconnect from anxious thoughts and maintain inner balance. The creation of winter counts, chronicles painted on animal skins, also took place at this time. Chiefs and keepers of history chose the main event of the year and recorded it with a symbol. This gave a sense of perspective. Winter would pass, and this year would become just one drawing in a long chain of history. Silence was also a tool. People knew how to sit motionless for hours, staring into the fire, without feeling awkward. This ability for inner contemplation conserved mental energy. To modern people, such sensory deprivation would seem like torture. Dreams took on special significance during the long nights. They were discussed, interpreted, and searched for clues about the future. The boundary between reality and the spirit world became thin in winter. This added mystical meaning and depth to life. Rituals and small ceremonies inside the home helped maintain the rhythm of life. Greeting the sun in the morning, feeding the spirits of fire. All this created the structure of the day. Chaos and meaninglessness were the main enemies of reason. Psychological resilience was instilled from childhood. Complaining about the cold or boredom was considered shameful. Stoicism was the norm, and it was this that allowed people to emerge from their winter shelters in spring not broken, but renewed. We are used to water flowing from the tap, but in winter camp, obtaining it was a real challenge. Every stream turned into a heavy sheet of ice, and to get to the water, you had to chop the ice with axes for hours. The work was exhausting, especially in strong winds. The ice could be tens of centimeters thick. Even after the water was opened, it quickly froze again. Therefore, obtaining water took up a significant part of the day. Rivers and streams were covered with such thick ice that one attempt to cut a hole was not enough. It had to be deepened, widened, and constantly monitored to prevent the edge from collapsing. Axes became dull from the cold ice, and hands quickly lost sensitivity. Sometimes people worked in shifts so that no one would get too cold. Such work required skill and strength, and most importantly, patience. The hole had to be maintained daily, otherwise the ice would close it up overnight. The frost showed no mercy, and it only took a couple of hours for everything to freeze again. If that happened, all the work of the previous day was lost. Therefore, water became a precious resource. It was conserved and distributed very carefully. In winter, it was more expensive than food. Eating snow to quench thirst was strictly forbidden. This rule was known not only to modern instructors, but also to peoples living in cold lands. Melting snow in the mouth took away heat, which was most important in the cold. Even a small piece of snow could rapidly cool the body. This led to weakness and dangerous consequences. Therefore, snow was first melted over a fire. Melting snow required fuel, which was always in short supply in winter. To get just a bowl of water, you had to melt an entire armful of snow. It took up a lot of space but yielded little liquid. Therefore, people only melted what was needed for cooking and drinking. No one was allowed to use water unnecessarily. Conservation was mandatory. Water was such a valuable resource that it was stored in closed containers to prevent loss. Women and children were responsible for ensuring that no water was spilled. Even a few drops were considered important. If water was spilled on snow, it was a serious loss. In cold conditions, water was more valuable than many other things. It was treasured like a precious commodity. Hygiene in such conditions seems almost impossible, but the Indians found ways to stay clean. They understood that a dirty body tolerates cold worse. That is why they used steam baths. These were small dome-shaped structures covered with animal skins. They became the center of winter self-care. There, the body was cleansed no worse than in a hot spring. Hot stones were brought into the steam bath and doused with water containing aromatic herbs. Steam instantly filled the space, turning the bath into a veritable healing cloud. People sweated, cleansing their skin of dirt and grease. In the hot, humid air, the body relaxed easily and the muscles recovered. This increased endurance. Baths were part of life and health. After such a steam room, some daredevils rubbed themselves with snow. It seemed crazy, but in fact it strengthened the body. The contrast in temperatures hardened the body and helped the immune system. Cold snow after hot steam cleansed the pores and killed bacteria. People felt extraordinarily cheerful. This procedure became an important part of tradition. Simple but effective methods were used for daily cleansing. Fat applied to the skin protected it from the cold, but over time it became dirty. Therefore, it was removed with bone scrapers. Sometimes stiff bundles of grass were added to them. This allowed the layer of old fat and dirt to be removed. Then a new protective layer was applied. The fat that was rubbed into the skin worked like a natural protective cream. It prevented cracks and frostbite. In the wind, skin without a layer of fat quickly cracked. Therefore, applying fat was not just a matter of hygiene, but an important part of survival. With fat, the skin became flexible and resistant. This protected people better than many types of clothing. Teeth were cleaned with twigs from certain trees. Their ends were chewed until they became soft brushes. Such natural brushes cleaned teeth perfectly. Charcoal was used as a powder to remove odors and strengthen the gums. People knew from childhood which tree was suitable. This helped to maintain healthy teeth. Dental health was vital. In winter, food became coarse. Dried meat, tough roots, nuts. All this required strong teeth. Oral diseases could make it impossible to eat. And in times of famine, this was deadly dangerous. Therefore, dental care was an essential part of everyday life. People understood its importance. Washing clothes in winter was almost impossible. Water froze immediately, and wet clothes turned into an icy shell. Therefore, clothes were cleaned using dry methods. They used chalk, clay, or simply beat them out in the cold. Smoke from the fires served as an excellent disinfectant. It killed odors and insects. The smoke permeated the clothes so much that over time, the smell became part of one's personality. People got used to it and accepted it as normal. The smoke also protected the skin and hair. It repelled parasites, which was extremely important in winter. Thus, clothes were cleaned and protected at the same time. It was a simple but effective system. Toilets were set up outside the camp. Even in winter, cleanliness was maintained, as it was understood that diseases came from filth. Going there was dangerous and quick because of the cold, but the rules were strict. People respected the camp space. This reduced the risk of epidemics. Water shortages often led to dehydration. The symptoms were subtle: headache, weakness, loss of energy. People thought it was fatigue, but in fact, the body needed fluids. Women made sure that everyone had enough to drink. They distributed water as needed. It was a job of great responsibility. Survival depended on cleanliness as much as it did on warmth. Dirty skin not only retained heat less effectively, but also became a source of disease. The Indians understood this better than most Europeans. Their methods were simple but surprisingly effective. That is why they were able to survive winters that killed unprepared people. Winter does not forgive mistakes, and the cold was the most patient hunter. Frostbite could come on unnoticed. At first, the skin turned white, lost sensitivity, and the person did not even feel pain. If you did not notice this spot on your companion's face in time, the tissue could die. Mutual inspection of faces on the street was a constant habit, a reflex. Hypothermia, the overcooling of the entire body, was even more insidious. A person began to feel drowsy, pleasantly warm, and eager to lie down and rest. This was a sure sign of imminent death. The only way to fight it was with movement and willpower. It was impossible to stop, impossible to sleep in the cold. Moisture was a catalyst for cold. Sweating in the cold was dangerous. Falling into the water was deadly. If moccasins got wet, they had to be changed immediately. Otherwise, in half an hour, the feet would turn into ice blocks. Drying clothes was an art. Leather could not be dried too close to the fire. It could become stiff and brittle. The cold air burned the lungs when inhaled deeply, causing coughing and spasms. People learned to breathe through their noses, passing air through scarves or fur collars. Running or hard work in the cold required a special breathing technique. Metal objects became sticky and burning cold in the frost. Touching an axe blade or rifle barrel with a bare hand could tear the skin. All tool handles were covered with leather or wood. These were small things, learned the hard way. Snow blindness was another threat on the open plains. The bright sun reflected off the white snow burned the retina. The Indians made glasses out of wood or bone with narrow slits to limit the flow of light. Without them, a hunter could be blinded for several days, becoming a burden to his family. Injuries healed much more slowly in winter due to a slower metabolism and poor circulation. Any cut could become infected. Medicinal herbs and ointments were harvested in summer, knowing that there would be nowhere to get them in winter. The elderly and the weak were the first to succumb to the cold. Natural selection was cruel, and only the strongest survived. Winter cleansed the population, leaving only the strong. Fear of the cold was a healthy feeling that forced people to be cautious. Carelessness was a privilege that no one could afford. Respect for the elements was the basis of their worldview. Even today, with our equipment, spending the night in a winter forest is a risk. For them, it was a routine that lasted 6 months. Every morning began with a struggle. Waking up in a cold tepee, crawling out from under warm skins into the air, where steam rose from your mouth, required willpower. The first thing to do was to stoke the coals and revive the fire. Until the flames danced, life in the camp was on hold. Muscles and joints stiffened overnight from the cold and hard bed. Movements were sluggish and slow. It was necessary to warm up the body and get the blood flowing faster. Hot broth or soup was the only way to kickstart the metabolism. Clothes often became stiff from the cold overnight, making them unpleasant to put on. Moccasins had to be stretched by hand to fit the shape of the foot. These were moments of discomfort that were repeated day after day. Checking food and fuel supplies was a mandatory morning ritual. Would there be enough firewood until evening? Was there any meat left? These questions determined the plan of action for the day. The men prepared their hunting equipment, while the women took care of the household. Scouting the surroundings was important for safety. Tracks in the snow could reveal who had passed by during the night, enemies or animals. The winter silence was deceptive, and vigilance could not be lost for a second. Despite the cold, children were also involved in camp life, but their activities were limited. They learned patience and observation. Adults set an example of fortitude, never showing their suffering from the cold. Work around the camp, clearing snow, repairing dwellings, tanning hides, warmed them better than a fire. Idleness meant freezing. The days were short, and it was necessary to get as much done as possible before sunset. Evening brought relief, but also anxiety about the coming night. The camp fell silent, the fires went out, and only those on duty remained. People fell asleep, hoping to wake up the next morning. The sign for bison imitated horns. The sign for woman was combing long hair. The sign for truth was a finger pointing straight from the heart. Hundreds and thousands of combinations allowed for the communication of complex concepts, from the terms of a peace treaty to descriptions of the terrain. We saw that survival in the Indians' winter camp was not just a physical challenge, but a complex system of knowledge, technology, and psychological discipline. Every detail, from the construction of moccasins to the telling of legends, had a practical meaning and served one purpose: to preserve life. Modern people, deprived of these skills and accustomed to comfort, would be helpless in the face of such elements. We have forgotten what it means to read the snow, endure the cold, and find warmth within ourselves. Their experience is a reminder of the incredible adaptability of the human species. How long do you think you could survive in such conditions with only the clothes on your back? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new dives into real history.